There was a stretch of the 1990s when Thursday nights belonged to one address, County General Hospital. For 15 seasons, NBC's turned a chaotic, fluorescent-lit emergency room into appointment television, and it did it with a cast that became some of the most recognizable faces in the world. George Clooney as Dr. Doug Ross, Noah Weil as Dr. John Carter, Juliana Margulies as Nurse Carol Hathaway, Anthony Edwards as Dr. Mark Green, and an ensemble deep enough to fill a hospital wing on its own. What most casual fans don't know is how strange the story behind the story really is. A pilot shot in a hospital that had been abandoned for years. A director who just won an Oscar, showing up to shoot an episode of network television. A star who filmed one of the most acclaimed hours in TV history while seriously ill. We combed through interviews, retrospectives, and contemporary reporting to put together 15 facts about ER that hold up to scrutiny. No message board rumors, just documented history. Let's get into it. Before ER had a studio, a budget, or even a season order, it had a location problem. The pilot, titled 24 Hours, needed to look like a real, overworked emergency department, and building that kind of set from scratch for an unproven pilot wasn't in the cards. So the production turned to something already sitting there for free. The Linda Vista Community Hospital in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles, a real hospital that had shut down for good in 1991 after decades of serving the community. Linda Vista had a long history by the time ER arrived. It opened in 1905 as the Santa Fe Coastlines Hospital, built to treat employees of the Santa Fe Railroad, and was rebuilt in Mission Revival style in the 1920s before eventually being renamed Linda Vista. By the time it closed its doors, the building and its equipment were simply left in place, according to the Center for Land Use Interpretation, and a tiled basement room from the old hospital became the backdrop for the pilot's most memorable scenes. Once NBC picked the show up for a full season, production moved to a purpose-built set at Warner Brothers Studios designed to resemble the ER of Chicago's County General. Linda Vista, meanwhile, kept its second career going. Over the following 2 decades, it hosted shoots for Pearl Harbor, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dexter, and dozens of other productions drawn to its genuinely creepy, lived-in atmosphere, before finally being converted into senior housing in the 2010s. There's an added wrinkle that makes the story stranger. Long before ER ever arrived, Linda Vista had already built a reputation in the local film industry as one of the more unsettling places to shoot in Los Angeles. A reputation that only grew once ghost hunting programs and paranormal investigators began touring the empty building years after it closed. Whether or not anyone on the ER crew personally experienced anything worth talking about, the show's origin story quietly runs through one of the city's most talked about supposedly haunted filming locations. The building that gave ER its first look is still standing. It just treats a very different kind of patient now. If Dr. John Carter looked wiped out during the season 1 episode Love's Labor Lost, that wasn't entirely acting. Noah Weil has said in multiple interviews, including one with the Television Academy, that he had mononucleosis during filming, running a 104-degree fever and hallucinating on set. At one point, he turned to the show's technical advisor and real emergency physician, Dr. Joe Sachs, and essentially asked for anything that would keep him upright. Sachs's solution was simple, because the set was already stocked with functional medical equipment. He hooked Weil up to a genuine 4-bag, Weil tucked it into his lab coat pocket during takes, and hung it back on a hook the moment the director called cut, repeating that routine for an entire night of shooting. The episode itself, centered on Dr. Mark Green's harrowing attempt to deliver a baby in the ER after misdiagnosing the mother's condition, became one of the most honored hours in the show's run. Written by Lance Gentile and directed by Mimi Leder, Love's Labor Lost won 5 Emmy Awards at the 1995 ceremony, including writing and directing, and it's still frequently cited by critics as the series' finest episode. Weil wasn't playing exhaustion for the cameras that week. He was working through it. In May of 1995, fresh off an Oscar win for Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino showed up to direct a network medical drama. The episode was Motherhood, the second-to-last installment of ER's first season, and according to the Television Academy's retrospective, it happened because George Clooney, who was about to work with Tarantino on From Dusk Till Dawn, suggested him for the job. Tarantino didn't write Motherhood. That credit belongs to supervising producer Lydia Woodward. But Woodward has said she deliberately pushed the medical content further once she knew who'd be directing, and the finished episode leans into exactly the kind of unsettling detail Tarantino was known for. A boy impaled by a playground rod, a gang member's severed ear, an overdose that foams at the mouth. By most accounts, Tarantino also insisted on shooting many scenes in a single take so editors couldn't reassemble the footage differently than he intended, a level of control unusual for a TV director for hire. The Mother's Day-themed episode aired on May 11, 1995, and drew roughly 33 million viewers, according to the Television Academy's coverage, making it one of the most-watched broadcasts of the week. Tarantino never directed television again after that, but for one night, County General ran on his rules. ER and Friends premiered within days of each other in the fall of 1994, both on NBC, both filmed at the same Warner Brothers lot. Not long after, the two shows briefly crossed paths, sort of. In the Season 1 Friends episode, the one with two parts, Part 2, Rachel injures her ankle and Monica takes her to the hospital, where they meet two doctors played by George Clooney and Noah Weil. Here's the twist casual viewers often miss. Clooney and Weil are not playing Doug Ross and John Carter. On Friends they're credited as Dr. Michael Mitchell and Dr. Jeffrey Rosen, entirely separate characters, working at a New York hospital rather than a Chicago one. It plays like a crossover without technically being one. Weil has since explained in interviews, including one with Entertainment Weekly's awardist podcast, that the appearance came together naturally because the ER and Friends casts already socialized constantly, being on the same lot, on the same network the same season. For NBC, pairing two of its biggest new hits in one scene, even under fake names, was a fairly obvious promotional move, and 30 years later, it's still one of the more delightful footnotes in either show's history. Season 4 opened with the stunt few dramas would attempt today, a live episode with no safety net. Ambush, which aired September 25, 1997, was performed live for the East Coast, then performed live again roughly 3 hours later for the West Coast, according to Wikipedia's episode history and contemporary reporting from Variety. Same script, same cast, same risk, run twice in a single evening. The idea reportedly came from stars George Clooney and Anthony Edwards, who pitched a live broadcast to recreate the real unpredictability of an actual ER shift. To justify the shakier, more handheld camera style a live shoot would require, the episode was framed as an in-universe documentary crew following the doctors through a typical day. A clever workaround that also happened to fit the show's existing walk and talk energy. 11 cameras were used in total, 5 of them handheld, a sharp departure from the show's usual Steadicam-heavy look, and the episode is also the only one in the series shot in a boxier 4:3 aspect ratio. A pre-filmed backup version existed in case of catastrophe, but according to Collider's retrospective on the episode, it was never needed. And in the middle of all that pressure, British actress Alex Kingston made her series debut as Dr. Elizabeth Corday, meaning her first day on the job, in character and in real life, was a live broadcast performed twice for the entire country. Most TV productions treat wardrobe as an investment to protect. The ER treated scrubs as a consumable. Because so many scenes involved simulated blood and trauma effects, once a set of scrubs was hit, it generally couldn't be reused, and the wardrobe department had to keep an enormous, constantly rotating supply on hand across 15 seasons of near-continuous carnage. The prop side of the operation worked on similarly practical logic. Needles used on camera had spring-loaded, retracting tips designed to look convincing without actually breaking skin, and the various fake blood and bodily fluid effects splashed across trauma scenes were built from ordinary kitchen staples, mixtures along the lines of tomato soup, oatmeal, and dairy products, chosen for realistic texture and color rather than taste. It's the kind of detail that sounds like a joke until you remember actors sometimes had to wear it for a full shooting day. None of this made it into the finished broadcast, but it says something about how ER approached authenticity. Even the parts of production nobody was supposed to notice were built to hold up under a documentary-style camera that rarely looked away. Juliana Margulies' Carol Hathaway became one of ER's emotional anchors and the only original cast member to win an acting Emmy during the show's run, which makes it stranger that, on paper, She was never meant to last past episode 1. In the original pilot script, Carol attempts suicide and dies. According to Margulies' own retelling on The Kelly Clarkson Show and in other interviews, the death scene was shot exactly as written, framed largely through George Clooney's Doug Ross reacting to it, since the two characters were former lovers. Then a test audience saw it. Per accounts from showrunner John Wells and reporting from TV Line and the Television Academy, viewers reacted so strongly and so negatively to Carol's death that producers reconsidered on the spot. Rather than reshoot the entire pilot, they made one small, clever fix. In the original cut, Dr. Susan Lewis states plainly that Carol is brain dead, but actress Sherry Stringfield happened to be holding a clipboard in front of her mouth during that line. That let the studio dub in new dialogue implying Carol would recover, without changing a single frame of picture. Carol Hathaway went on to appear across 6 seasons, and Margulies has said Clooney personally tipped her off that producers were reconsidering the character's fate before the change was finalized, reportedly encouraging her to hold out for it. The nurse who was supposed to die in episode 1 instead became one of the show's most beloved characters. ER looks, on the surface, like a product of its era, but the bones of the story predate the show by 2 decades. Michael Crichton, who trained as a doctor at Harvard Medical School before becoming a novelist, wrote an original screenplay in 1974 called EW, short for Emergency Ward, drawing directly on his own experience working in a hospital emergency department as a medical student, according to Wikipedia's history of the pilot episode. Nobody wanted to make it. The dialogue was dense, the medical jargon went largely unexplained, and studios at the time considered it too technical for a general audience. So the script sat unproduced for years. What changed things was Jurassic Park. Crichton had already been developing a working relationship with Steven Spielberg, and after Spielberg's 1993 dinosaur blockbuster became a cultural phenomenon, he revisited Crichton's old emergency room script and decided it was better suited to television than film. Spielberg signed on as an executive producer for the first season and brought in John Wells to run the show. When 24 Hours finally aired in September 1994, it was adapted very closely from that same 1974 screenplay, according to Wikipedia. A concept Hollywood had spent 2 decades calling unfilmable turned into a 15-season, multiple Emmy-winning institution proof, maybe, that sometimes a script just needs the right decade. It's hard to picture ER without George Clooney, but by his own account and those of the show's producers, nobody was chasing him down for the role. Clooney had years of television experience by 1994, yet Doug Ross wasn't handed to him easily. According to the Television Academy's oral history of the show, Clooney showed up at the ER production office on only the show's second day of operations, uninvited, and made enough of an impression that executive producer John Wells eventually agreed to let him audition. Even after that, there was internal resistance. Reporting on the casting process describes Warner Brothers executives who were lukewarm on giving Clooney what they viewed as a secondary lead, given other projects he was already under contract for. Wells has described Clooney as locked onto the role with total conviction once he got the script, unwilling to consider anything else. It was the test audience, once again, that settled the matter. Former NBC President Warren Littlefield has recalled people in the room reacting emotionally as they watched Clooney's performance for the first time. Clooney ended up being the first actor officially cast on the show, the same actor who'd had to show up unannounced and push his way into an audition in the first place. ER's medical dialogue was notoriously dense, packed with real terminology delivered at a sprint, and George Clooney found his own way of managing it. He wrote his lines on cue cards and physically stuck them around set, on clipboards, medical charts, equipment, wherever he could glance without breaking the scene. It's part of why Doug Ross so often appeared to be studying a chart with intense focus. There was a decent chance he was reading his next line off it. Clooney's cleverness didn't stop when he left the show. A full year after departing as a regular, he quietly returned for a cameo in Juliana Margulies' farewell episode, Such Sweet Sorrow, in 2000. According to Entertainment reporting on the episode, Warner Brothers sent NBC a clean cut with no Clooney footage, then swapped in the real version at the last possible moment, meaning the network itself didn't see his scene until it aired live on the East Coast alongside everyone else. NBC reportedly wasn't thrilled about losing a promotional opportunity it never knew existed, but the surprise landed exactly as intended for viewers. Television usually fakes its hospital gear, plastic props, monitors with buttons wired to nothing. ER took a different approach almost from the start, sourcing actual defibrillators, EKG monitors, and surgical instruments for use on set rather than building convincing fakes. To manage the obvious risk of untrained actors handling real medical devices, the production kept qualified doctors and nurses on set throughout filming, continually coaching cast members on how to correctly perform procedures like suturing, intubating, and starting in force so the technique would hold up on camera. Practical safety adjustments were made where they had to be. Defibrillators had their shocking mechanisms disabled, and monitors had their speakers removed so an alarm sound wouldn't accidentally blare through a take, with those beeps added back in post-production instead. Noah Wyle has spoken about how much medical knowledge rubbed off on him, simply from being immersed in that environment for years, telling interviewers he came away feeling he had something close to the grounding of a third-year medical student. That kind of hands-on realism is a big part of why medical professionals so often cited ER as one of the more procedurally accurate dramas on television, even while acknowledging its patients survived resuscitation attempts at a rate no real hospital could match. Before ER, most TV dramas were filmed the way a stage play might be. Static cameras, characters largely standing still while they talked. ER physically moved its camera through crowded hallways, around gurneys, and past trauma bays in long, unbroken takes designed to make the audience feel embedded in a shift rather than watching one from a safe distance. Cinematographer Thomas Del Ruth is widely credited with helping pioneer that use of Steadicam-driven, documentary-style camera work in episodic television on the ER pilot, mixing handheld movement with a high-contrast lighting style that pushed characters from blown-out light into deep shadow within the same shot. That visual approach paired naturally with the show's rapid-fire, overlapping dialogue, which was frequently delivered while characters were walking rather than standing still, a technique that kept dense medical exposition from feeling like a lecture. The influence didn't stop at ER's walls. Del Ruth later brought a similar cinematographic approach to The West Wing, and showrunner John Wells carried the walk-and-talk format into other productions he ran afterward. A visual language that started in a fictional Chicago ER ended up reshaping how prestige television moved for years afterward. The list of familiar faces who cycled through the show over its long run is genuinely long. Bradley Whitford before The West Wing, Taraji P. Henson years before Empire, Kristen Davis a few seasons before Sex and the City, along with actors like James Cromwell, Nick Offerman, and John Mahoney appearing in smaller roles. For 2 decades, a fictional Chicago emergency room quietly doubled as one of the more reliable stepping stones in the industry, long before most of these names meant anything to a casting director.